Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1033 for December 3rd, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
There's a sort of move of flight to safety. So maybe I don't want to buy the cask or the bottle from the distillery I've never heard of or is quite lowly traded. But if I go and buy a Macallan, a Bowmore, or a Springbank, I'll probably, there's always going to be a demand for that product. So even within the secondary market, within the privately held whiskies, you're seeing that shift to people being a bit more cautious, I would say, in terms of what they're buying.
What goes up must come down applies to investing as well as gravity, and after years of gains, we're starting to see a downturn in the value of rare whiskies. Duncan McFadzean of the consulting firm Noble & Company tracks the luxury whiskey market. This week he published a report showing a 7% decline year over year in the value of luxury whiskeys sold at auction. I'll talk with him later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Greetings, everyone. It's Gabriel Cardarello with Jewers, and I have big news. Jewers is about to unveil the first chapter of a 4-part collector series dedicated to honoring the most famous whiskey-producing regions of Scotland. More on that in a bit.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Lots of awards were handed out this week. We'll begin with the Scottish Whisky Awards Thursday night. Erin's Lag Distillery was named Distillery of the Year for their efforts to create a new destination on the Isle of Arran. North Star Spirits was named Independent Bottler of the Year. Eight Doors Distillery in Wick was named the Tourism Destination of the Year. And Inchdarney's Rye Law Rye Whiskey was named Newcomer of the Year. Retired Diageo Master Blender Maureen Robinson received the Dr. Jim Swan Award for her services to the Scotch whisky industry. We have a link to the complete list of award winners in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. Whisky Magazine handed out the Irish Icons of Whisky Awards the other night as well. Colm Egan of Bushmills was named to Whisky Magazine's Hall of Fame, while Irish Distillers was named Distiller of the Year, and Billy Layton was named Master Distiller/Blender of the Year. Powerscourt Distillery won Visitor Attraction of the Year honors, and Blackwater Distillery was named Craft Producer of the Year. Killowen Distillery co-founder Brendan Carty, who was featured on last week's episode, was named the Irish Whiskey Brand Ambassador of the Year. Once again, there's a link to the complete list of winners in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. And the Irish Whiskey Awards were handed out Wednesday night in a rescheduled ceremony at Jameson Distillery, Bow Street in Dublin. Connacht's distillery exclusive cask strength was named the Irish Whiskey of the Year. Drumshanbo Single Pot Still Pinot Noir cask won the award for Best Single Pot Still 11 years and younger, while Red Spot 15-year-old won the award for Single Pot Stills 12 years and older. Writer's Tears took home the awards for Blended No-Age Statement Whiskey for its Double Oak and Best Blended Limited Release for its Japanese cask finish, and McConnell's 5-year-old Sherry cask took home the award for Best Age Statement Blend. The Irish Whiskey Awards ceremony was originally planned for several weeks ago at the New Middleton Distillery Experience Visitors Center, but had to be moved to Dublin because of flooding that did extensive damage to the attraction. Got word this week that tours and tastings have resumed at Middleton using temporary facilities for the holidays. The Visitors Center itself will not reopen until February at the earliest. More news from the stock market. Remy Cointreau's first-half profits missed analyst estimates because of a sharp decline in U.S. demand for cognac. The company reported a 43% decline in operating profits and maintained its guidance of a full-year decline of 15 to 20% in sales. Remy also owns Bruichladdich and Westland whiskey, in addition to its cognac portfolio. And there's a change at the top of Pernod Ricard USA. CEO Anne Mukherjee is stepping down for family reasons. She's being replaced by former Irish Distillers CEO Conor McQuaid, who's been working at Pernod Ricard's Paris headquarters the last couple of years as an executive vice president in charge of sustainability, responsibility, communications, and public affairs. In other news, the two unions representing Chivas Brothers employees in Scotland have announced their plans to go on strike next week. GMB Scotland will stage a one-day strike at Glenlivet and Aberlour distilleries, along with other facilities on December 12th, while Unite plans 3 days of rolling strikes targeting various facilities between the 12th and the 14th. Both unions are also instructing their members to reject overtime and short notice shifts starting on the 11th. A Chivas Brothers spokesperson says the strikes will not affect any year-end orders, since most have already been shipped out. We are less than a month away from the resumption of the European Union tariff on imported American whiskies. This time the tax will double from 25% to 50% unless U.S. and EU negotiators can work out an extension of the current freeze on tariffs. The tariff is retaliation for the Trump administration's move back in 2018 to impose tariffs on European steel and aluminum to protect the U.S. steel industry. It was suspended 2 years ago when the U.S. and Europe agreed to pause their tariffs and try to negotiate a free trade deal. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Biden administration has proposed to extend the current freeze by 2 more years. New whiskies announced this week. Heaven Hill has released the fall 2023 edition of Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond. It comes from barrels filled in the fall of 2015 and will have a suggested retail price of $109.99 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. Jack Daniel's has released its latest Distillery Series bottling. The 12th release in the series is a straight Tennessee whiskey finished in Oloroso sherry casks for 3 years. It's available at the distillery's gift shop and at selected Tennessee retailers for $41.99 a bottle. Fuji Whiskey is out with the second of 3 planned releases of its 30-year-old single-grain Japanese whiskey. The release celebrates the 50th anniversary of the Mount Fuji distillery. Just 100 bottles will be available in the U.S. at $3,000 each. Deanston has released a new limited edition cask-strength virgin oak finished single malt. It's finished for 12 months in virgin American oak barrels from Kentucky's Kelvin Cooperage and carries a recommended retail price in the U.S. of $97.99 a bottle. Iowa's Cedar Ridge Distillery has released the quintessential Portside. It's a 6-year-old blend of barrels dominated by a ruby port finish, along with first fill Amontillado sherry and virgin French oak casks. It's available in Iowa and the Chicago area, along with the Cedar Ridge website for $99.99 a bottle, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. And finally, Middleton is out with another edition of Middleton Very Rare Der Gaelach. The 5th edition in the series features barrels made from 6 Irish oak trees harvested from the Kilranlach estate in County Wicklow. Each tree produced a cask-strength whiskey at a slightly different strength in the 57% range. Bottles will be available in Ireland, the UK, the US, France, and China, with a recommended retail price of €440 each. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's look at a few of the upcoming whiskey events on the calendar. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts has a Horse Soldier bourbon tasting this Wednesday night, along with a Dalmore tasting on the 13th and a Kentucky Owl tasting on the 22nd. The Whiskey Exchange has a Christmas Barrel Top tasting this Thursday night at its Great Portland Street shop in London. Sotheby's will hold an auction of rare whiskeys and spirits at its New York City gallery this coming Saturday, And a handful of tickets are still available for the Victoria Whisky Festival, January 18th through the 21st in Victoria, British Columbia. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlach and the Classic Malts lineup. More people are looking at whiskies as an alternative investment to stocks, bonds, gold, and other asset classes. But even though the volume of bottles hitting the auction market rose by nearly 10% over the past year, the value of those whiskies fell by 7%. That's according to a new report by Duncan McFadzean, who heads up the food and drinks practice at Scottish financial consulting firm Noble & Company. I've spent some time breaking down the data with him on a Zoom call this week. Let's start by defining our terms. What do we define luxury whiskey as in this report?
So we look at it in two ways. So we captured a whole data set that was over £100 per bottle. And it's a big debate as to what luxury or fine and rare is. But we thought that's probably historically where people would think about collecting or investing rather than just purely drinking. But we also looked this time at a sub-segment of that, which was over £1,000. So we particularly dug into what's really happening in things that you really wouldn't drink. It's quite rare to drink something over £1,000. So, and the trends are quite different.
Explain how they are different. Let's start with the £1,000 category, because that's the headline report here, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So what we're seeing there is that the value of what has been transacted at auction has gone down by 7% over the last 12 months. But then you break that down and you look at the volumes, and the volumes are up by 10%. So you know, highlighting the price decline. Whereas when you go further down to the £100 level, the value's flat, because you're seeing this big, much bigger volume uptake, where people are going from more expensive bottles down to cheaper bottles.
So they're trading down.
They are trading down, and I think what's happening as well is new people are coming into the auction market, which is a really interesting trend, and I'm sure we'll get into why that might be.
Well, let's go ahead. Why might it be?
Yeah, I mean, you can never tell from the data, right? So you see the data and the volumes going up, but the three areas I have a heavy suspicion from anecdotes talking to people in the industry is one, I think more people are flipping bottles of whiskey and trading. So if you're a flipper and you want to buy a bottle of whiskey, hold it for a couple of weeks, try and make a profit, then where you're going to gravitate to is where there is supply of bottles and liquidity of bottles, so you can be confident you can get in and out. That tends to be the cheaper bottles where there are just simply more of them. So I think that's one trend. I know some people really hate the flippers and some people think it's great. But the reality is it's part of the auction market. It's always going to be part of the auction market. So that's a real live factor that's driving a lot of volume for the auction sites. I think the second factor is our suspicion is that some bottles you simply cannot get in the retail outlets anymore. You go and try and buy Springbank, it's really, really difficult to get hold of. And therefore, we think that some drinkers are going to auctions as their first point of call to buy whiskey that they want to drink. And that's the corollary of whiskey companies becoming a bit more savvy about how they actually market these sort of fine and rare bottles and limited supply, etc. And it's driving people to the auctions to try and get hold of that. And then the third one is, and I have a colleague who is in disdain with me for this theory, but it's really the millennials who there's this theory that when millennials went through the financial crisis, they got disillusioned with financial assets, intangible assets, and so they've looked to put their money into tangible assets. And so what we would see happening is that they're actually buying bottles of whiskey, and anecdotally, we do hear that confirmed. That they're buying bottles of whiskey as basically a store of value rather than sticking their money into the stock market or something similar to that. So those are the three factors I would say are really driving the bottom end of the market. And then there will be people trading down. Maybe it's a bit of cost of living, the macro climate, etc.
Speaking of the macro climate, we're looking at not necessarily record inflation, but very high inflation rates worldwide. How is that playing an impact here?
Yeah, so, well, inflation's led to higher interest rates, and that's led to slowing growth, as we know. If you looked at the start of this year, I think most people, UK, US, were thinking, okay, it's maybe going to be a tough sort of first quarter. Second quarter, we'll probably peak out on inflation, and then inflation will start to come down, rates will start to come down, and we'll be back off to the races. And that actually isn't what's happened. Inflation stayed higher for longer, both in the UK, US, loads of countries around the world. And therefore we've had higher rates, slower growth. That's knocked confidence, even where people haven't had a massive hit to their budget. It's knocked confidence, and so you're seeing luxury goods demand and collectibles really slowing off across the board, and that's a global feature. That's not specific to the UK. It's not specific to whiskey. You're seeing it in art. You're seeing it in sneakers. You're seeing it in watches. So that sort of trend is happening, and you'd think interest rates shouldn't necessarily impact auction prices for bottles of whiskey over £1,000, but it seems that it does, and therefore you think, okay, so until that changes, until there gets confidence in the macro climate, can this market really seriously recover? I don't know.
This all comes despite the fact that we just set a world record for the most expensive bottle of whiskey with the Macallan 1926 Valerio Adami bottling a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think for the ultra rare bottles are in a market in a world of their own. There's so few of them come to auction, and the auctions are handled so well, and they bring in a select bunch of buyers who are ultra wealthy, that those people are not swayed by what's going on in the economy. They're not swayed by the macro factors that you might be if you're a buyer of a £10,000 bottle of whiskey. And so, I don't think that's going to be an issue. The issue there is going to be supply rather than the demand side. You go down a little bit, though, into the 10,000 to £100,000 bottles. And one of the areas we looked at is what's actually happening on the percentage of bottles that don't sell at auction. And normally it's about 4% of bottles don't sell at auction. But you look at that 10,000 to £100,000 bracket, which is a wide bracket, but it's symptomatic of quite expensive bottles, not the Macallan 1926. And that's 12 to 15% of those bottles are not selling, and that figure's rising. So what we think's happening there is you've got really savvy collectors who are just going, do you know what? I don't need to sell this right now. I don't need the cash. And the market's a bit soft, so I'm just going to sit on this. Either sit on the reserve price. If it sells, great. If it doesn't, I'll just hold it for another year or two, and that's fine. So that's quite an interesting, different point of the market, where the market's weaker in terms of value, but it's actually a supply factor rather than a demand factor, I think, on that side of things.
This whole thing can be confusing to the average whiskey person. Can you put it into English?
Which part? So, all of it. I would say, if you looked at what's happening at auctions right now, the market has been on the rise for years and years and years, with the exception of COVID. It's been a one-way street. Everyone's been going, great, let's pile in on whiskey. We're going to make some money, and the auction is the way to get that money out. In the last 12 months, what we're seeing is it's gone from plateauing to turning down. Now, does that mean that people are not going to want to collect whiskey? I don't think so. People are still going to want to drink whiskey, collect whiskey, but maybe it's a reminder to people that investing in whiskey is not just sort of a guaranteed path to riches. And then, if you looked at the tiers of whiskey, I would say ultra rare bottles, they're still very much in demand. The next tier down, there's not as many of them coming to market. And then at the bottom end, it's the flippers that are driving that trading, driving that volume. So you're seeing volumes high, prices down.
What brands are doing well besides the Macallan?
So the ones that you would look at, Springbank continues to do really, really well. The Dathmill, really small distillery, but only distills a couple of times a year and has become a bit of a cult classic. And so collectors really, really like that. It's very hard to get hold of. Glenallachie with Billy Walker's resurrection of Glenallachie is doing really well at auction, and then Arran of the newer ones is definitely coming through as well. And then I think the one we're starting to look at is Tormore that Sukhinder Singh bought with his Elixir Distillers business from Pernod Ricard in exchange for the sort of, or maybe not in exchange, but in parallel with the whiskey exchange sale. And they're only just starting to bring product to market, but you're seeing starting to appear on the auction lists. And Sukhinder's a very respected person in this space, and so I think people are watching closely to see what he actually does. And then the other ones that continue to do well in terms of average price are the ones that were closed. So Brora, Port Ellen about to reopen. Rosebank, those are still very, very popular bottles that people want to pick up.
Your report cited Tamdhu, Dalmore, and Glenturret as fastest growing whiskey brands by volume in the secondary market.
Yeah.
How are they doing compared to others?
Well, you have to watch for like release schedules at auction, because you've not just got the collector releasing bottles into the market, but you've got the brands doing new releases that quite often come into the auction market. So if they've got a new release, then you can drive the volumes up significantly. Glenturret's doing really, really well. We looked at it in quite a bit of depth, and it was quite interesting. What's selling at auction are the bottlings that happened since Lalique bought it. And so it's the new bottlings that are coming to the auction are doing really, 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 really well in prices. I mean, one of their bottles sold £68,000 only a year ago, which for a Glenturret is, they're definitely moving right up there into that bracket of the Dalmore, etc., Bowmore and that sort of prestige luxury assets. Tamdhu, you see, people are talking very, very well about it. They do see it as sort of an up and coming one that they would have a lot of respect for.
Let's say that I'm getting into whiskey investing for the first time. Besides telling me not to do it, what advice would you give?
Well, yeah, this is interesting. So, we're a corporate finance advisor, and therefore, one thing that we do not do is give advice to what we would call widows and orphans on what they should invest in whiskey. I would say you should take proper advice and think carefully about it the way you would any other investment. I'm not going to give you you should buy this bottle and you should buy that brand. When you look at casks, I think you don't have to read very far to realize there's a growing amount of concern about what's going on in the cask investment market, and that's maybe raises more questions than on the bottle side.
I was about to get into that because we're seeing more and more claims of casks not appearing properly or casks disappearing. And I'm beginning to wonder if this is a bubble that's about to burst really badly for us.
Yeah. So it's the question on everyone's lips, I think, in the industry and outside the industry. So one of the indicators I have always looked at is when my friends start calling me up saying, "What should I invest in this?" and they've never invested in that asset class before, it's a warning sign. So, do you remember in the dot-com boom, the cab driver would say, "Oh, should I invest in AOL or something like, or this startup that you've never heard of?" And I think now I'm starting to see that, but people have never invested in whiskey are getting in touch to say, "Should I buy this cask? Is this cask good value?" And that's a warning sign. There are very good reasons to buy a cask, and there are very reputable people and great casks out there. So you wouldn't want to tar everyone with the same brush. But there's a growing number of stories of scammers, fraudsters, etc. in the industry. It's not heavily regulated. And the cask investment brokers that have come in are doing big volumes of casks. And everyone's watching to see what happens, but there's definitely reasons for concern, I would say, without wanting to say it's a bubble.
How did whiskey become an alternative investment?
I think it goes from, I guess, you go back to the time when everyone was drinking blends, and then they suddenly woke up to the fact that single malts again could be, a really attractive product, and then you could create brands, and then all of a sudden people used to find casks down the back of the warehouse where there was only one or two, and they said, "Why don't we bottle this?" And then maybe we can sell it at a slightly higher price. And then all of the distillers started doing that. And then people realized, well, maybe this bottle that I've got that I bought at £70 and it's actually selling at, £2,000. Maybe I can make some money. And they started to see people make some money. And then you had some headline sales. And then you had the every year after year after year, when prices went up, it drew more people in. Exactly the same happened in the late 90s in the internet bubble, didn't it? And then, the financial services bubble, where everyone goes, "Oh, this has been going up for 7 or 8 years. This must be a great thing. I should put some of my money into it." So human behavior doesn't change, really, does it?
No, we're always looking for the next big thing to invest in.
Yeah, the difference here is maybe if it all goes wrong, you couldn't drink your stock certificates in your .com, whereas you can always drink your whiskey if it comes back to it.
I've made the argument for years that the safest investment in whiskey is buying shares of the publicly traded whiskey makers because they're liquid, they're regulated. You get actual financial details a couple of times a year on how that investment is performing as a business. And I'm not sure whether that still holds true in light of today's market on the secondary side for whiskey as an alternative investment.
Yeah, so typically in any industry, if you were buying a publicly quoted company, it might fall 10-20%, like Diageo did recently after its profit warning. And so therefore, you might lose 10-20% of your money, but you're probably not going to lose 98 or 100% of your money. If you invest say you invested in equity of a privately held distillery, then that company might actually go bankrupt and you might lose all of your money. Investing into casks or whiskey, there needs to be an exit route, and where's the visibility on that? What it's interesting at the moment, what you're seeing is people are buying more bottles of the top 10 brands that trade at auction. So there's a sort of move of flight to safety. So maybe I don't want to buy the cask or the bottle from the distillery I've never heard of or is quite lowly traded. But if I go and buy a Macallan, a Bowmore, a Springbank, I'll probably, there's always going to be a demand for that product. So even within the secondary market, within the privately held whiskies, you're seeing that shift to people being a bit more cautious, I would say, in terms of what they're buying.
What does this hold for the coming year? What's your projection for how things are going to shake out in 2024?
Yeah. So you look at the economy and starting with the macro, and you think, okay, inflation is likely to continue coming down, but nobody's really expecting rates to come down significantly in 2024, and growth's going to be pretty mediocre, and it's not going to feel like a fantastic year. And then you've got all the geopolitical noise, etc. You've got elections, which generally fills the news headlines with sort of negative commentary. And so it's hard to see it being a massive turnaround from the macro standpoint. You might start to see that towards the end of 2024. Within whiskey itself, if that's not changing, if luxury goods are still struggling, then why would we expect whiskey to be anything different? So I don't think we're expecting a significant collapse of whiskey, but I think it's going to struggle to do much more than tread water or continue to drift downwards, I would say.
You write the Commercial Spirits Intelligence Substack along with your pal Martin Purvis, who we've had on the show before. What are you guys working on these days?
We're looking at a number of things. So one of the things is the rising appetite, I think, for mergers and acquisitions in the industry. So I think a number of the new distilleries are getting to a point where maybe their business model is challenging. Maybe the shareholders have been in 10 years or more. Maybe the banks aren't as easy to lend from. So what might that mean in terms of roll-ups or exits or companies going bankrupt? That's definitely one of the things. We're looking at the current trading is challenging, but at some point that will turn. If this is a destocking rather than a significant economic downturn that's driving a lot of the challenge for spirits, then once you get to the 12-month anniversary of that, then you should start to see better news flow. So we're looking for signs of, is that happening? And then one of the other ones is the bulk market, where people would trade and sell bulk spirits amongst the industry. That's got really tight because a lot of the majors have just been laying down stock in anticipation, big growth in India, China, US in future. So don't sell the liquid to anyone else, just put it in your warehouses. And that's meant that market's got really tight. As the macro climate means those markets are softer, then will you see the spirits majors start to release more of that stock back into the market? So we're looking at these things. And then each week we wake up and think, what are we going to write about this week? So, one of the, I think this week we're going to look at the linkage between cask prices and bottle prices at retail. So, if you translate it back into retail prices, does that actually make sense? Can you extrapolate one to the other? And what does it mean for cask prices?
Interesting, because people try to value the cask at what you can get for a bottle from that cask and how many bottles you can get out of it. So that's going to be interesting.
And that's a bit what we're looking at. But you've got to realize some people are not rational in how they buy casks. It's very much, I want a cask of that, and I don't want to translate it into bottle prices. Now, at the end of the day, that cask has to get bottled, otherwise it will evaporate away, and it will not be it will be under 40%, and it will not be whiskey anymore. So they have to bottle it at some point. So somewhere down the line, there must be a rational buyer. But I've had people call me up in the past that want to buy distilleries that never plan to sell any of the bottles to anyone. They just want all the bottlings for themselves. Now that's millions of bottles they want for them and their friends. So there are some interesting people out there who look at whiskey in a different way than you or I might.
I'm trying to think of a response to that other than just that there are irrational people almost everywhere. And I can't imagine somebody wanting to buy a distillery just to take up all the bottlings for themselves.
Yeah. Which is, it's quite mad. And other people want to buy, the Macallan or Glenfiddich or, the whole distillery or the whole brand. And, these assets are just not going to come up for sale. So there's definitely some very rich people out there that see whiskey as still very, very appealing.
Thanks to Duncan McFadzean of Noble & Company for spending some time with us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with a relative rarity, a peated Irish single malt. Waterford's Cuvée Fumo single malt is bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has touches of peat smoke, heather, honey, and a nice maltiness. The taste is peaty and phenolic with notes of heather, smoked salmon, honey, and a hint of baking spices that comes alive on the long and smoky finish. I'm scoring Waterford's Cuvée Fumo Irish single malt a 94. Waterford's Cuvée Coffee doesn't have a coffee influence at all. The label was designed by French artist Nathaniel Coffey. Once again, it's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose is malty with touches of honey, vanilla, and dried fruits. The taste is malty with a nice barley sugar sweetness and notes of allspice, dried fruits, honey, and vanilla. The finish, long with a lingering touch of allspice. I'm scoring the Waterford Cuvée Coffee a 93. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 200-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, double oak, cask strength, or reserve series ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails at a retailer near you. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and please drink responsibly. I got to taste the new McLean's Nose blended scotch from Adelphi, and there's a double meaning behind the name. McLean's Nose is a rock formation near Adelphi's Ardnamurchan distillery in Scotland, and longtime whiskey writer Charles McLean consulted on the blend. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose is grassy and malty with hints of lemon zest and smoked salmon. The taste is well-rounded and complex with subtle spices, barley sugar, a slight touch of brine, lemon zest, and freshly cut grass clippings. The finish, long and slightly tart. I'm scoring McLean's Nose from Adelphi a 93. And finally, I got to taste the Lindoris Abbey single malt a couple of weeks ago in Fredericton. This bourbon cask-matured single malt is bottled at 49.4% ABV, and the nose has touches of lemongrass, straw, honey, and vanilla. The taste is fruity and tart with hints of lemon pepper and cinnamon bark spices that last and last. Then they fade gradually to reveal honey, straw, and barley sugar notes. The finish is long with a nice balance between tartness and sweetness, and I'm scoring the Lindoris Abbey single malt a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,600 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
At Dewar's, we're gearing up to unveil a prestigious 4-part collector series of exceptionally high-end blended malts. The first gem in this collection, none other than the extraordinary Dewar's Double 37-year-old, a blended malt that is nothing short of remarkable. The Double 37-year-old undergoes Dewar's cutting-edge 4-stage aging process, meticulously designed to draw out the essence of whiskey barrels dating back to the late 80s. The result? An impeccable balance and a level of smoothness that is off the charts. To pay homage to the Speyside whiskey producing region, it gets an extra tip of the hat, with the finishing process resting in Oloroso sherry casks that once cradled the prestigious Altmore single malt whiskey. As for the taste adventure, brace yourself for captivating notes that include the warmth of cinnamon, the velvety sweetness of heather honey, succulent juiciness of peaches, zesty pops of orange peel, and a decadent shower of brown sugar. And let me be clear, I'm merely giving you a glimpse of the sensational flavor adventure this whiskey has in store. This exceptional whiskey, though, is a rare find, so stay vigilant and find it at a store near you.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whisky. Last time around, we featured some of Northern Ireland's distilleries, and Brian Redden posted this in the WhiskyCast community app. Glad to listen to your feature this week on Northern Ireland's resurgent whiskey industry and to hear from some of my personal favorite brands. Thanks for recognizing them and the good work they are doing. Thank you for the kind words, Brian. Now, we're kicking off a year-end project to identify the top whiskey stories of the year, and we need your help. We'd like you to suggest the stories that had the most impact over the year, things like, for instance, the impact of inflation on whiskey prices. You can post your suggestions in the WhiskyCast community app or share them with us on social media. We're on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and you can also email us at comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whisky on the web at waterfordwhisky.com.
100 individual farms of Irish barley, separately harvested, malted, fermented, distilled and matured. Is that too much effort? Perhaps. Unless you're interested in flavour above all else. Waterford Whisky, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. We've talked before about how whiskey got its name, derived from the Gaelic Uskaba, or water of life. But how did alcohol get its name? Well, we have to go back centuries to Arabia, where they pioneered distillation of something called alcohol. According to the 2002 book The Whiskey Treasury by Walter Schubert, alcohol was the name for a black powder used to decorate one's eyes. Schubert writes, quote, "This led the writer Ambrose Pierce to call alcohol the liquid that can get a man black eyes. Only when you drink too much of it." If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this week's episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple and Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Dewar's Double 37-year-old blended malt whiskey is a true collector's treasure, a rarity worth hunting for and cherishing, perhaps sharing with the lucky few. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 48% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, Please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.